Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com. This is Anti-War News for Friday, December 29th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of Antiwar.com today, Shin Bet dismissed warning on Hamas attack. So months before the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel, the Israeli security agency Shin Bet received a warning from one of its sources in Gaza that Hamas was planning to carry out a big move shortly after Yom Kippur, which took place on September 25th this year. And this was reported by Israel's Channel 12. So this report said that Shin Bet dismissed the warning as insignificant, and the intelligence did not make it to senior officials in the agency or to its chief, who was Ronan Bar. Shin Bet sources said the lack of corroborating intelligence and the fact that the source only recently started talking to the Israeli agency contributed to the tip not being taken seriously, although they later admitted that the source was considered highly reliable. So this tip is just one of many pieces of intelligence that was ignored or not taken seriously by the Israeli security establishment, which led to Israel failing to prevent the October 7th Hamas attack. There was that report recently from the New York Times that revealed Israel had obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 7th attack more than a year before it took place, but Israeli military and intelligence officials did not believe Hamas was capable of carrying it out. So, keep that in mind when the Shin Bet officials are saying, oh, there wasn't corroborating intelligence. But if they knew about this Hamas attack plan, and also there was a report from Haaretz, and there's been a lot of Israeli military personnel have said this, but this one specific report from Haaretz said that Israeli military officials, commanders, were ignoring warnings from women in the IDF who are called spotters. Basically, they sit at these bases near Gaza all day and they watch surveillance footage. And for about a year, for more than a year, they were telling their commanders, their commanding officers that Hamas is up to something. They're rehearsing attacks. There's a lot of strange activity, and they said all those warnings were ignored. There's other things. Egypt said that they warned Israel that Hamas was planning something big, and this was confirmed by Michael McCall, the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, that Egypt gave a warning to Israel. So they say there is no corroborating intelligence, but it sure seems like there was a lot of signs here. Really that New York Times report was a big bombshell because it said they basically had the specific attack plan and they followed it. The way the Times put it, Hamas followed the battle plan with shocking precision. And this battle plan did not set a date for the attack, but it described an assault designed to overwhelm the fortifications around the Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters. And that's what Hamas did and attempted to do on October 7th. So all of this and other factors are putting Netanyahu in a very dicey situation politically, and this all gives him motive to continue this horrific slaughter that's happening in Gaza. All these polls show that Israelis want him to step down after the war for the intelligence failure and for his strategy of propping up Hamas to prevent a Palestinian state. And of course, there's, people are going to theorize that maybe Israel let this attack happen to justify what they're doing in Gaza. I think if they did let it happen, they didn't expect it to be so big. I think certainly a possibility. I kind of lean more towards Netanyahu was ignoring Gaza because his coalition is focused on the West Bank, where there's lots of expanded operations there. But let me know what you think. I'm pretty much open to any ideas on this. There's just so much evidence that they had a lot of intelligence. And now, on the other hand, they probably get all sorts of intelligence from Gaza all the time. But this seems like, a mountain of evidence pointing to a big attack that they failed to prevent. All right, so the next one here. Israel admits to killing dozens in a Christmas massacre in a refugee camp. So this article is from Middle East Eye. And it says that the Israeli army admitted on Thursday that it killed dozens of Palestinians in an airstrike on the Magaji refugee camp in Gaza on Christmas Eve. An army spokesman told Khan News that the military regretted the attack, which killed 70 people, had harmed people adjacent to the intended target. So they're saying that it was collateral damage. The spokesperson said, quote, "A preliminary investigation revealed that during the attack, additional buildings were damaged adjacent to the targets that were meant to be attacked. This apparently resulted in harm to those not involved. The IDF regrets the harm to those not involved," end quote. Israel had previously bombed the camp, but the attack on Sunday was described as one of the deadliest since the start of the conflict in early October. The bombing of the camp started just before midnight on Christmas Eve and continued into Christmas Day. Hamas called the attack a horrific massacre, a new war crime. On Wednesday, the Palestinian Health Ministry said the death toll from Israel's operation had surpassed 21,000, most of them women and children. Herzi Halevi, the head of the Israeli Armed Forces, said on Tuesday that the hostilities will continue for many more months. So Israel's killed over 21,000 Palestinians so far, majority of them civilians, and this is first time I know that they're saying that they regretted an airstrike. So I think that says a lot. But it's interesting that they responded to the specific one, I guess, just because of the scale of it. And there's so much evidence that Israel's dropping, their biggest bombs, their biggest 2,000-pound bombs on densely populated areas. There was that report from 972 magazine that said they were intentionally targeting civilian areas, and that they were, in at least one case that their sources discussed, the Israeli military signed off on an airstrike that killed hundreds of civilians just to kill one Hamas commander. So that's their attitude. They don't care about killing civilians. But for some reason, they're saying they regret this specific airstrike. All right, so the next one here, over 500 Israeli soldiers killed since October 7th. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And it says the death toll for Israeli soldiers continues to grow. Nearly 400 members of the Israeli security forces were killed on October 7th. And then since the IDF invaded Gaza, at least over 150 soldiers have been killed. After several revisions, Tel Aviv now says that about 1,050 Israelis were killed during the October 7th Hamas attack, and that includes 373 soldiers. Now, after that, Israel launched its bombing campaign in Gaza and then the ground assaults. So the Israeli military is saying that so far 164 soldiers have been killed in the Israeli ground invasion of Gaza. And the defense ministry says that 3,000 soldiers have been wounded in combat. But there was a recent report in Israeli media that said over 5,000 Israeli soldiers had been wounded, including 2,000 who were disabled. So that, again, that was Israeli media, and that raises questions about if the Israeli military is kind of downplaying the casualties. And Kyle mentions it's unclear how many Hamas fighters they killed. At the end of November, the IDF reported killing 1,000 to 2,000 Hamas fighters, but over the past month, Israeli officials have been claiming that they've killed 7,000 Hamas members. And a source close to Hamas said in one recent report that they said about 10% of their fighters had been killed, which is about 3,000. So we don't really know exactly what that number is. And I know Hamas is saying Israel, they're doing much more damage to the Israeli ground forces than they're admitting. But either way, I mean, when it comes to Israel and casualties, 160 something soldiers, when it, compared to previous wars, is a pretty high casualty rate, especially 5,000 wounded. All right, so the next one here, Israel wants Apache attack helicopters from the U.S. This is another one from Kyle, and it says Israeli officials have asked their American counterparts for additional Apache attack helicopters. The White House has yet to give a response, leading Israel to step up the pressure on the U.S. The IDF is heavily using the Apaches across multiple fronts. So Ynet, which is an Israeli outlet, reported that the Israeli defense minister requested the attack helicopters, and that this was made to the Pentagon as well in recent weeks. So Israel has used their Apache attack helicopters in Gaza, the West Bank, and along the northern border with Lebanon and its battles with Hezbollah. Israel only has 2 squadrons with Apaches, which are currently experiencing heavy use. They've basically been conducting around-the-clock operations, and they want more so they can continue their brutal campaign. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army raids Ramallah, more occupied West Bank city. So this article is from Al Jazeera, and so overnight, Wednesday night into Thursday, Israel carried out these a huge number of raids in the West Bank in 10 cities, including Ramallah, which is where the Palestinian Authority is based. So these are big cities that they raided. The death toll I saw, only 1 Palestinian was killed, but this was reported as the biggest raid in the West Bank since the war on Gaza started in October. And they also reported that the Israeli forces seized $2.5 million from money exchange shops during this raid. So they're saying that the Israeli military was stealing money from the Palestinians. The Palestine Monetary Authority said Israeli forces raided the headquarters of 6 exchange companies under its control across the occupied West Bank at dawn. The Israelis arrested a number of the owners of these companies and seized sums of money from their safes after blowing them up. I guess they blew them up to open them. So I think we're going to see more and more of these raids across the West Bank. All right. So the next one here, another one from Al Jazeera, under the rubble, the missing in Gaza. And this says that 7,000 Palestinians are believed to be buried under collapsed buildings. 7,000. You know, I knew that there was a few thousand. I didn't know that was the number. And 21,000 have been killed, and likely most of those 7,000 are dead. And it just tells an anecdote about a Palestinian in Gaza whose family is buried under the rubble. Every morning, 51-year-old Yasser Abu Shamala goes to the place where his family's house once stood in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. He starts digging through the rubble with his bare hands, lifting pieces of concrete to try to find members of his family buried under the debris. Abu Shamala's family house was bombed by Israeli forces on October 26th, demolishing the building and killing his parents, brothers, and cousins. The strike killed 22 people, with many more trapped under the rubble. Abu Shamala's family members are among the more than 7,000 people who are reported missing in Gaza, including 4,900 children and women. The missing are believed to be trapped under bombed buildings, according to Hamas officials in Gaza. Despite multiple failed attempts, Abu Shamala refuses to quit and has pledged to continue searching for his relatives and recover their bodies from under the ruins of the house. He hopes he can bury them in a cemetery with proper Islamic rituals. And the big problem is that they don't have heavy machinery. The Gaza Civil Defense is tasked with rescuing people every time a bomb is dropped, but its ability to mount rescues is restricted by a lack of advanced equipment. They spoke with one member of the Civil Defense who said, quote, "The equipment we use is very outdated, and the Civil Defense hasn't received any new equipment since 2006. The Civil Defense is working with the least minimum equipment," end quote. And they showed the tools that they're using to dig people out of the rubble, and it includes a shovel, a sledgehammer, a manual cutter, and crowbars. I mean, that's all that they have. So it's no wonder that many people are still stuck under the rubble. All right, so the next one here, Iraq is heading toward ending the U.S. military presence. So Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani said his government is heading towards ending the presence of international forces in Iraq, which includes about 2,500 U.S. troops, and that's the largest foreign contingent. Al-Sudani's comments came after his government strongly condemned several rounds of U.S. airstrikes in Iraq as a violation of sovereignty and a hostile act. In the latest strikes, the U.S. said it targeted the Shia militia Kateb Hezbollah in retaliation for an attack on a U.S. base, but al-Sudani's government said civilians were also wounded in the U.S. bombing. Al-Sudani said at a press conference with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, quote, "We are in the process of rearranging the relationship with the international coalition. As in light of the presence of capable Iraqi forces, the Iraqi government is moving towards ending the presence of the international coalition forces," end quote. So al-Sudani first came into office at the end of 2022 and made his first public comments on U.S. troops in Iraq in January 2023. It was in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he expressed support for the presence of foreign forces. But he's been under increasing pressure to get them out, especially now as Iraq has become a battleground between Shia militias and the U.S. due to President Biden's support for Israel's assault on Gaza. The U.S. has been resisting Iraqi efforts to expel its forces from the country since 2020, when a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad killed the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, and it also killed Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. Enraged, many people in Iraq and Iraq's parliament voted to expel all foreign forces. They voted to kick the U.S. out, but the U.S. refused to leave. And the Iraqi prime ministers have been under pressure from, the anti-U.S. elements in Iraq ever since. And those are a lot of the elements. It's not just the Shia militias. There's a lot of people that don't want the U.S. there for very good reason. Kind of to placate these elements, the U.S. formally changed its presence in Iraq from a combat role to an advisory role in December 2021, but it did not withdraw any troops at the time. There was 2,500 U.S. troops there, and there's 2,500 U.S. troops there today. So if al-Sudani tries to expel the U.S. from his country, the U.S. can make things very difficult for him. One of the key things here, I think, is that the U.S. has control and has had control of Iraq's foreign currency reserves since 2003. Since the invasion, Iraq's foreign reserves have been held by the U.S. Federal Reserve. And that gives the U.S. the control of Baghdad's dollar supply. It gives the U.S. the ability to devalue the Iraqi dinar, which it did earlier this year over allegations of smuggling, what they call smuggling, which is just trading with Iran. And the U.S. also keeps tight control over Iraq's ability to pay Iran for electricity. Iraq is very reliant on Iran for electricity and some other energy things, and the U.S. signs waivers to let Iraq pay them, but at any time they could end that. They could just clamp down. They could really mess up Iraq's economy if they wanted to. So I think that's just a big part of the reason why the U.S. is still there, even though so many people in Iraq want them out. But we'll see. I think this will take time. If al-Sudani is very serious about this and he's ready to really try to get them out, I think it'll take some time. But hopefully it happens, because this is just a tripwire for war. There's no reason for the U.S. troops to be there. And this presence in Iraq supports the U.S. occupation of eastern Syria. Without U.S. in Iraq, it's very unlikely they'd be able to maintain the occupation of Syria. All right, so the next one here, U.S. allies reluctant to join anti-Houthi Red Sea naval coalition. So while the U.S. is trying to put on a united front to prevent Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, many U.S. allies are reluctant to participate in the task force that's been formed, which is formally known as Operation Prosperity Guardian. So the Pentagon claims that 20 countries are participating in this operation, but the U.S. has only announced 12, and they're saying, we're not going to name the other countries. We're going to let them, announce it themselves. So, it's hard to believe that there's countries involved that aren't publicly saying they're involved. But anyway, even some of the countries that the U.S. said were members of the coalition have issued statements distancing themselves from it. After the U.S. announced the launch of Operation Prosperity Guardian and said that Spain was a participant, Madrid denied its involvement. The Spanish Defense Ministry said that it will not participate unilaterally in the Red Sea operation. Italy, which was also included in the U.S. announcement, said that it would send a frigate to protect Italian shipping interests, but it made clear the deployment was not part of the U.S.-led operation. Notably absent from the coalition is Saudi Arabia, which is one of the U.S.'s main partners in the region. The U.S. has backed Riyadh in a war against the Houthis since 2015. But Saudi Arabia is now seeking peace and fears that if it was involved in this task force, the Houthis would start hitting their oil infrastructure again. So the Houthis stated they started the attacks against Israeli-linked shipping due to the Israeli onslaught in Gaza and said that they will not stop until the siege ends. So what's likely happening here is that these countries are reluctant to participate because they do not want to appear to be supporting the Israeli massacre like the U.S. is. They don't want to appear like they're defending Israel. And this goes for some of the U.S.'s closest European allies who don't want to be sending that message as well. So the U.S. announced new sanctions on Thursday, supposedly targeting the Houthis. They said they targeted a financial network that was funding the Houthis. Who knows if there's truth to that, but either way, it shows the U.S. kind of taking desperate measures. Sanctions aren't going to affect the Houthis. They don't have assets in the U.S., so they don't have to worry about that. And those types of things are not going to get the Houthis to back down. All right. So the next one here, Senator Lindsey Graham calls for the U.S. to bomb Iran, which this might not sound like news, but the things he said were just kind of extra crazy, so I figured I'd cover it. Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, has called for the U.S. to bomb Iran in response to Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, saying Iranian bases and oil fields should be blown off the map. So the hawkish senator claimed that without Iran, there would be no Houthis, which is completely untrue. The Houthis, formerly known as Ansar Allah, they're a homegrown movement of Zaydi Shia Muslims. And Zaydi Shia is a distinct Shia sect, different from the Twelvers, the Twelver Shia that is most predominant in Iran and in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And Zaydi Shia imams ruled the area of North Yemen that the Houthis control now for 1,000 years until 1962. So the idea that the Houthis wouldn't be there without Iran is just complete nonsense. So anyway, Graham told Fox and Friends on Wednesday, quote, "Without Iran, there are no Houthis. The Houthis are completely backed by Iran. I have been saying for 6 months now, hit Iran. They have oil fields out in the open. They have the Revolutionary Guard headquarters you can see from space. Blow it off the map," end quote. The Houthis have been targeting Israeli-linked shipping. Sorry, that's just a summary of what the Houthis have been up to, which I just covered in the last article. But Graham also criticized the Biden administration for not bombing the Houthis, which would jeopardize a peace deal in Yemen. He said, quote, "We're fighting the Houthis. We beat the Germans and the Japanese. We should be able to beat the Houthis. Secretary Austin and the Biden administration's failing our troops in the field," end quote. And I should also note that the Saudis and the UAE, they bombed the Houthis. It was a brutal war, brutal air campaign against them, and it did nothing to unseat them from Sana'a. The Houthis didn't really lose any territory after the U.S.-backed Saudi coalition intervened in 2015. So they're definitely a tough bunch to fight. So Graham, he's known for his extremely hawkish rhetoric. He's been a staunch backer of Israel's massacre in Gaza. He previously said there's no limit to how many civilians Israel can kill. And he's also described the situation in Gaza as a religious war and called for Gaza to be completely leveled. So those are the types of things that Lindsey Graham likes to say. All right, so the next one here, Iran denies claims of escalated nuclear enrichment work. And this article is from Jason Ditz, who was our original news editor. And he's had some health problems, but he's doing a lot better and he's back writing. So this is good to see. And this is kind of his specialty. He knows a lot about nuclear power, nuclear, specific things about uranium enrichment. So he's always good at covering this type of stuff. So on Wednesday, the head of Iran's atomic energy organization, Mohammad Eslami, said that Western media reports of acceleration of uranium enrichment were totally unfounded, suggesting the U.S. was hyping the claim as an attempt to distract from the goings-on in the Gaza Strip. Eslami said, quote, "We are proceeding with our current activity within the framework of the regulations," end quote. And he added that Iran is continuing to enrich uranium to 60%. 60% is the uranium enrichment level, which is lower than the over 90% enrichment that is needed for weapons grade. So 60% can't make a bomb. So the U.S. claimed, citing the IAEA, that Iran had tripled their production of near weapons grade uranium. So that's what they call 60% is near weapons grade. And basically saying that, I mean, this is very small amounts anyway. It says that they were up to approximately 9 kilograms per month, whereas a few months ago they were only producing 3 kilograms per month. But I know at one point the IAEA said they lowered their level of production, on a monthly rate. So it does just seem like a claim just to put some focus on Iran and accuse them of trying to make a bomb, even though there's no indication that that's what they're doing. And then Jason explained some specifics here, basically saying how long it would take for Iran to make a bomb, even if they started. First, it would take them a while to be able to get up to 90% uranium enrichment. Then they would still need 40 to 50 kilograms of 90% uranium to attempt to produce a single bomb. And then they would have to test it. And basically, he's saying it would take years, this process. And because Iran's nuclear program is under such stringent inspections and is very transparent, unlike the Israeli nuclear weapon program, their secret nuclear weapons program, the U.S., they would basically be inviting, a U.S. attack if they did take these steps. So it does seem like just a distraction. And the war drums are definitely beating for Iran, as you can see with what Lindsey Graham said and what Israeli officials and hawks in the U.S., mainly Republicans when it comes to Iran, really beat the war drums and rattle their sabers. Democrats, for the most part, are pretty bad on Iran too, but when it comes to kind of the rhetoric, you hear it more from Republicans. Excuse me. All right, so the last story here. But again, it's good that Jason's back. I wanted to look. He's written over 30,000 articles for Anti-War.com, which is incredible. I looked at my number. I've hit over 5,000. So nothing compared to what Jason has done. All right, so the last story here. Chinese military says the Pentagon exaggerates the China threat. So China's defense ministry said Thursday that provisions included in the Pentagon's annual military spending bill that President Biden recently signed into law unreasonably exaggerates the so-called China threat. The 2024 National Defense Authorization Act includes amendments to expand the U.S. military presence in the Asia-Pacific and provide more military support to Taiwan. So this is Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman Wu Qian. He told reporters that the NDAA, quote, grossly interferes in China's internal affairs and seriously damages China's sovereignty, security, and development interests. The Chinese military is strongly dissatisfied with and firmly opposed to this, end quote. Wu criticized the U.S. alliance building in the Asia-Pacific that's being done explicitly to prepare for a future war with China in the region. One thing this NDAA does, it includes an amendment to sell nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, and that is part of this AUKUS military pact between the U.S., Australia, and Britain that was signed in 2021. And Wu also had strong words for the U.S. assistance to Taiwan. This NDAA gives them military aid, which started in 2023. The U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan since 1979, when they severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan to open up with China. But the military aid is new. They've never financed the purchases or provided them weapons free of charge. They started doing that in 2023, and China is very unhappy about it. The NDAA also includes an amendment that requires the Secretary of Defense to form a training program for Taiwan's military. So all things that China is not happy about. Wu also commented on reports that the U.S. was reclaiming a World War II-era airfield in Tinian. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but Tinian is an island that's a U.S. Pacific territory about 118 miles north of Guam. So the airfield on this island was used as the launching point for the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The U.S. abandoned the airfield after World War II, and now they have to clear all this jungle, this overgrown jungle that's grown there. And this is part of, they're doing this at a lot of several World War II era airfields across the Western Pacific to prepare for a war with China. Basically, Wu said that, well, I'll just read his quote. He said, quote, "The United States has strengthened its forward military deployment in the Asia-Pacific region and increased regional tensions. Countries in the region should remain highly vigilant," end quote. So the military buildup in Asia still goes on, even with everything happening in Gaza and Ukraine. So that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. One from David Stockman, "No peace on earth, blame Woodrow Wilson." One from Kelly Vlahos, "The biggest foreign policy losers of 2023. One from Philip Weiss, "The Jewish establishment's blindness to Palestinian slaughter also hurts American Jews." One from Ramsey Baroud, "The untold story of the October 7th attacks." And one from Gideon Levy, "There's no way to explain degree of death and destruction in Gaza." So please go check all that stuff out. And another word on our fundraiser, we have completed, we have reached our goal. So thank you very much to everybody who supported us. We're leaving it up through the end of the year. If you want to give before the 1st of January, you could write off your donation on your taxes. And it's always good for us to have a cushion. It means, it gives us more time until the next fundraiser. And this money that we raise is to run the site. We barely have any overhead, but this money is needed to pay our small staff and, and columnists and administrative things. That's all this goes to. We're not making big money over here at antiwar.com. So please, if you do like this show and you have the means, consider making a donation before the end of the year. So that is everything. And that's it for the week. It was a short week with Christmas. I'm planning on working on New Year's Eve, which is Sunday, and putting out a show for Monday. It might be a little short, a little light, but I'll be there. And then you could celebrate New Year's with me, since I post the show at midnight on the East Coast at least. So yeah, I'll be back after the weekend. I hope everyone has a good one. Thanks for listening.